What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto had Madara and the Kyuubi sealed inside of him, or what if Naruto was Ice Guide to Game of Thrones, go check out my main channel. And if you're interested in what if Naruto was taken over by the Kyuubi when he was born, or what if Naruto was trained by Itachi after leaving Jiraiya, go check out my second channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. It shouldn't have come as a surprise that Naruto found himself preferring to travel solo simply because it was much more lenient on him. Traveling with not one but two unconscious people made things difficult because they made moving infinitely more sluggish than what he was used to. Every corner needed to be double checked and his back was constantly being watched because their pace was one that could effortlessly be tracked by anyone with the talent. He was thankful that there weren't any troubles waiting for them in the forest, but as they advanced through the woods it only led to a more problematic situation. He couldn't set up a camp for the night without putting Elia and Rhaenys in danger, which meant they'd have to settle for a more human sleeping arrangement. To acquire such a place he needed to figure out an excuse that made him carrying two unconscious people not appear to be suspicious. Naruto was just happy to have his cloak again. The cloak was perfect for hiding Elia's identity since she was by far the most recognizable from the trio. He also hid Rhaenys' identity by ensuring that her face was kept against his chest, and other than the strange look from the innkeeper, his attempt to hide them looked like it was working out. The blonde did have to spin a quick light to make sure that they ended up with the room he paid for. His lie made Elia his wife and Rhaenys their child, and as a family they needed a room because his wife and daughter passed out after extended travel. Invoking some pity and paying with gold dragons made for the perfect combination. There were no further questions or looks from the innkeeper. The three of them had their room. Rhaenys and Elia were asleep on the bed while Naruto was sitting at the desk, his fingers tapping on the wood just beneath the extinguished candle. It's going to take another few days to make it into Dorne from where we are now. If we keep walking, I'm not sure how we will get to Sunspear, but that's something I can talk to Elia about when she wakes up. Then once he was done with his excursion to the south, he could start planning what he'd do after that. Oh, who was he kidding? There's no way that he'd plan out anything. Plans might fall on top of him, but until that happened he'd do things as he always had, by improvising. On the bright side, Naruto never went out of his way to visit Sunspear due to it being so far out of the way, but with Elia and her daughter at his side there wasn't a better time than the present to check off the Dornish capital from his traveling ticket. Tucking a hand into his armor, Naruto pulled out a trifecta of kunai that he then placed in a single file line on the desk in front of him. The cluster of kunai on the table were the remnants of the supply he went to Dorne with. The number was certainly low, but considering that he was alive and well, he'd have to call the whole thing a success sooner rather than later. I'm going to need to visit Essos and have more of these babies forged from his very first fight too. At some point last year, Naruto always found it to be a struggle when it came to finding a weapon that felt right. He used a quarterstaff, an axe, a warhammer, a flail, a mace, and even 3 variants of bows, but none of them spoke to the blonde in a way that he could call satisfactory. That void was filled during a trip to the free city of Mir, where Naruto happened upon a brother and sister blacksmithing combination. Their operation was a modest one with plenty of wares to choose from, but it was their specially made daggers that Naruto favored. The kunai was longer than a typical throwing dagger and much more streamlined with a better weight when compared to its typical counterpart, which made it perfect for a melee weapon. And as a projectile, I should have left them with an order already in place so I could swing by and just pick them up. I guess I have some other things to help me. In the meantime, he did have an ace or two up his sleeves. Being a one-trick pony just wouldn't do. The killer of men was prevented from revealing one of those aces when a soft yawn brought attention to the fact that one of the two princesses had awoken from their slumber. It was Rhaenys sitting up with her mouth pulled open and her eyes dragged shut. When her eyes did open, it was Naruto in her line of sight. It was Naruto's presence that made her lock up. Naruto forcibly kept the glower from his face. The sunshine-haired male was appalled that a girl so young woke up only to taste terror. He had an idea how he could fix that, but first he needed to get the young noblewoman chatting. With that purpose in mind, he got up from the desk and hunkered down on the floor next to the side of the bed. Rhaenys was closest to sitting on the floor, made Naruto look much tinier, and it also made Rhaenys peek over the edge of the bed to view him. It didn't take long before his blue hues had the privilege to meet stares with her wary brown having her attention. He smiled nice and wide. Hi. Rhaenys swallowed the spit that rested heavily in her mouth and lent her weary voice out around her torpid tongue. Hi. He wasn't stalled in the slightest by her less than enthusiastic response to his greeting. Naruto's bright grin was very much whole. Do you remember me? He asked in what he believed was an encouraging voice, looking back at her mother and obtaining some comfort in her being as close as she was. Rhaenys nodded her head fractionally. You saved me from. She didn't have the heart to complete the sentence, so instead she wordlessly nodded her head in confirmation. Naruto set his hands on the insides of his knees before he nodded his head back at Rainy's and her almost statement, "Yup, that was me, but you were really awesome too. You were crazy brave for your mom." His progress made was shown in the form of how far he got Rainy's to lift her head away from the bed. Before he was only able to see her eyes, but now Naruto was able to see almost all of her face. "Really?" she asked with her diminutive voice. "For sure, your mom must be really proud of you," he stated with a smile that was too bright for an assassin of all people to possess. Naruto knew that if he had a kid, then he'd want them to be as strong as the girl in front of him. He saw no harm in telling her that her mother felt the same. The young girl wasn't used to interacting with people outside of her mother, and the lack of experience showed a small bit of praise like that was enough to bring a blush out on her face. Suddenly feeling bashful, Rainy's looked off to the side where Naruto's smiling face wasn't. "Thank you," she said much too quietly to be anything but embarrassed. "You're welcome. So what's your name?" "My name's Naruto." Talking with a kid was different from talking to an adult. When talking with a child, it was up to the adult and the conversation to guide its content, or else circles would be spoken. "I'm Rhaenys Targaryen." Unlike most people of noble birth, Rhaenys introduced herself with all clarity. Of a rodent, it was extremely clear that what she experienced in the Red Keep was still affecting her behavior. "Nice to meet you, Rhaenys Targaryen. I'm going to bring you and your mom home," Naruto informed, or maybe reminded Rhaenys of the promise he made to her some 10 hours ago when she was asleep in his arms. Where Rhaenys was quiet and reserved, Naruto continued to act with a bright exuberance that dared Rhaenys to join him. Elia Martell's daughter only knew one place as home in her life, and that was the tower that she and her family were contained to in the Red Keep. Theirs was a setting far from suitable for a child to grow up in, and it showed when Rhaenys answered him. It was with apprehensive thoughts of that particular place home. He supposed that it was careless of him to not consider the Red Keep when thinking of places that Rhaenys would identify as a home, but he didn't believe that the damage was irreparable. "No, not that home. We're going to Sunspear." His excitement wasn't difficult to create, and it was his hope that a similar enthusiasm would find its way to the young princess. Naruto's gambit worked like a charm. The fear that had a home in her eyes was replaced by a level of wonder that only a child was able to produce. Wow, really? She always wanted to visit the place that her mama told her so many stories about, a place where her uncles and family was. "Yes, really. First we need to wait for your mom to wake up." "What do you say, Rhaenys? Do you want to do something cool?" The mischievous grin that crept over Naruto's lips suggested that he had the perfect idea in mind for how they could pass the time. The former wife of Rhaegar Targaryen was stirred from her slumber by the sound of her darling daughter laughing. She was actually laughing. Elia shot up from her bed as the memories of where they were last came back to dominate previously peaceful thoughts. She was very much awake now, and as such she saw Rhaenys standing on their savior's shoulders. As he skipped about the room, Rhaenys was evidently enjoying herself as bursts of joyous laughter rained down from what was a very different perspective for the small child. Her voice may have been raspy from only just waking up, but that didn't stop Elia from calling out to her child. "Ray." The slightly misconstrued voice of the woman on the bed stopped what the smiling pair was doing. In tandem they turned to look at her with harmonized expressions of curiosity that almost made Elia smile, knowing what the girl wanted without needing to be told. The blonde lowered Rhaenys back to the floor. Her feet had hardly touched the ground before she dove at her mother with a short squeal of happiness that was only suppressed because Rhaenys' face was buried into the hug. The day was something of a blur in her mind, but Elia could have sworn that Rhaenys was dirtier now than she remembered. With a critical eye cast upon her wiggling daughter, she decided it was time to ask Rhaenys about it. "And just what have you been up to, Ray?" Eager to share, Rhaenys opened her mouth to tell her mom all about the fun she had with Naruto, but stopped when she remembered what Naruto told her, shutting her mouth. Then grinning, the young girl inclined up and pecked her mom on the cheek. "Nothing, Mama." Naruto and Rhaenys spent the 2 hours where Elia was sleeping and Rhaenys was not having all kinds of fun. This amounted to Naruto putting the young lady on his shoulders and introducing her to the fast-paced life of traveling through trees. Rhaenys easily accepted that 100 minutes or so as the most fun she ever had. Any doubts inside of Elia were quickly smoothed out upon receiving her darling daughter's affection. Moving on from that, Elia directed her next question towards the blonde man who got them to where they were now. "Where are we?" Naruto were somewhere near the middle point of the Stormlands at an inn that I found a ways off the main roads. Making the personal choice to further his survival, Naruto opted to not tell her that in this place they were man and wife again. Elia found herself short of thought when Naruto surprised her with something he said. The first instance came when he said he wanted nothing for saving her. Then there was the detection of Lannister men coming up the tower, and now they were in the Stormlands. Logically it made no sense, but the unspoken part of her was already accepting the blonde's word as fact. She only had one word For him, how Naruto tried to hide his fatigue by giving the woman a succinct answer, "I've always been fast." The run to this point had taken its toll on Naruto, and blitzing about the area with Rainies on his shoulders only exacerbated his fatigue, but the girl's laughter was more than worth any tiredness he may be exhibiting. Rainies started to hum a tune from one of her favorite tales. Her hummed-out voice dragged Elia's attention down, because she thought Rainies might have something to say. This distraction allowed Naruto step in and direct the fledgling conversation in another direction. "Elia, what's the best way to get to Sunspear from here?" Since she knew the lands of Dorne like she did the back of her hand, Elia was able to conjure up a quick, suitable answer. "Starfall. It was the closest place to the border, meaning the least amount of travel, and it was the home of her best friend Ashera Dane. Their arrival would be welcomed, and they'd be protected until they found a way to make it to Sunspear." As someone who was not nearly as familiar with the geography of the south, Naruto yielded to her expertise. "Sounds like a plan. I suggest that we leave in a few hours." The sun was only starting to rise, which meant they had some time to eat breakfast and maybe find a horse to help ease the burden of travel by speeding it up. Someone who wasn't holding back their excitement was an over-the-moon Rainies' mama. "I'm so excited that Naruto is taking us home. I want to see our family." The young girl's innocent comment was bolstered with a bright smile. Clearly her time bonding with Naruto did wonders for her mindset. The happiness was contagious, and Elia found herself smiling down at her beaming daughter. "You must be patient, Ray, okay?" she told her child, who looked far from focused on what she was saying. Sighing, she moved her attention to Naruto once more. "You look like you're in need of this bed. Are you sure that you're alright for such a long period of travel?" The assassin waved off the concern with a snort. "One more day without some sleep won't kill me." Not wanting to hear any more on the subject, he hastily left the room to see about securing breakfast for the three of them. "You're not the one I'm worried about." 15 hours later, Elia, Naruto and Rainies were on the home stretch of their journey to Starfall Castle, the tower of said castle growing ever closer on the horizon. With the help of a substantial amount of gold, he was able to procure a horse that Rainies had called Silver. In honor of the silver mane the mare sported, Elia and Rainies rode on top of Silver while Naruto led from the front with a hand on the horse's reins. Not unlike a shepherd and its herd, Rainies was occupied by playing with the mare's mane and Elia was focused on Rainies, but Naruto was much more interested in admiring the beauty of the red mountains that Starfall was built among. There wasn't much in the way of vegetation on the red slopes, but the memory of how the sun shined on the rocks was more than enough to make up for the lack of green. It was the red that made the pale stone sword tower that much more radiant with its vibrant white structure. The sense of the nearby summer sea started to intrude upon Naruto's senses when something much more demanding came forth. It wasn't a man or a woman, but rather a beast of massive proportions, because in front of him was a blockade in the form of a 10-foot bear with brown fur. Its mere presence struck fear into both child and horse, but thankfully Elia was there to soothe both with a gentle hand and soft whispers. With whispers, whimpers, and whinnies behind him, Naruto stood steadfast as the only thing between the pair of women on the horse and the hungry bear. When he finally took a step forward, it provoked the bear to rear up on its hind legs. The bear's burly body blocked out what little light there was left, and its roar was loud enough that it caused some loose soil to slide down the mountainous hills. Its nature to impose upon smaller things also meant that it was exposed. Particularly, it was the underbelly that was vulnerable to a swift barrage of dragonglass needles that punctured through the thick fur and into the bear's throat. Unlike it, how approached, the bear fell back into the dirt, totally silent apart from the sound of its body hitting the path, which created a minor pulse of dust and dirt that spread out in a ring-like formation. Sensing something happen, Rainies peeked out over the head of Silver. "Did you kill it?" she asked her question in what was barely a whisper. The bear may have wished them harm, but she didn't want to see it die. Naruto alleviated her fears when he actually climbed onto the bear's back, perched just behind its head. He patted the big bear on the top of its head, which caused the creature to snort loudly in its forced sleep. It was a reaction that made Rainies giggle because it was a funny sound. There was both relief and exasperation in the sigh that worked its way out of Elia's mouth. "If you're done, we should keep moving." Despite what Elia thought, Naruto did not move from where he was sitting on the bear. It was actually a surprisingly warm spot. "I think we might be closer than you think." Naruto then gestured over to the left where a man wearing the sigil of Housestaying was watching them with a bow on his back. "He is correct. There's a welcoming party waiting for your arrival at Starfall." Lady Elia, with the message delivered, he turned around and ran out of their line of sight, which wasn't really all that hard to do with all the uneven ground surrounding them. "That guy has been following us for an hour," Naruto said, more for the prosperity of his fellow adult than for himself. With a satisfied smile settled in place, he took the horse by the lead again and carefully navigated the skittish creature around the sleeping bear that the horse still saw as a threat. Thanks in part to their leisurely pace, the trio took 20 minutes to finally make it to the entrance of Starfall Castle. where a procession of people was waiting for them, and at the front of that group was Ashera Dane. Ashera Dane was a woman who was an embarrassment of riches when it came to terms of elegance and beauty. Her height only made the beauty of the woman that much grander because it gave more for her luxurious dark hair to complement like the striking purple of her eyes. Ashera was dressed in a fine purple dress that was cut to show off the area north of her bust and her slender neck, which was wrapped with an elegant purple choker that was dripping with 3 laces of pearls tailing south towards her chest, and as of this particular moment her subtly painted pink lips were illuminating her already gorgeous face with a smile that could rival the sun. When it came to radiance, she was truly fitting of the title Lady of Starfall. Elia, I can't express how happy I am to see you. Reflecting her smile, if not a bit smaller, Elia helped Rhaenys off the horse and went to greet her best friend with a hug that may as well have gone on for hours in the minds of Elia and Ashera. Gods, I have missed you, Ashera, Elia admitted into the side of her friend's nape. When Elia remembered that she wasn't alone on this trip to Starfall, she pulled away from Ashera, turning her eyes to Rhaenys. The mother gently nudged her daughter between her and Ashera. Go on, introduce yourself. Ray, gripping the clothing on her body just over her hips, the young princess did as she was taught and performed a curtsy. Hello, my name is Rhaenys. Ashera was instantly smitten with the adorable actions of Rhaenys and began to gush over the cuteness of the girl she took to calling little lady. Ashera wanted so dearly to visit Elia when news of Rhaenys came down the vine, but her brother always forbid her from going anywhere near King's Landing, so this was kind of like a dream come true. Lady Dane's praise quickly reasserted that Rhaenys wasn't familiar with dealing with people outside of her mother because Rhaenys' entire face flushed red like a tomato, something not even hiding behind her mother's legs could stop basking in Rhaenys' reaction. The 2 noble ladies burst out in competing laughs that mixed together into one smooth sound. Once she got herself under control, Ashera took Elia's hand and guided her to the open gates of Starfall. Welcome to Starfall, come in, we have plenty of things to talk about, and let's see about finding you some new clothes. Starfall Castle. Naruto filled the entirety of his last 2 days roaming along the grounds of Starfall. He only required those 2 days to recognize that this was somewhere that he was very out of place staying, and nearly every person he had met thus far was so fraudulent in hopes they might gain some semblance of favor to his non-noble ears. It felt that if they weren't bitching, they weren't happy. He was willing to bet that if he handed these people literal gold, then they'd go on to complain that it wasn't shined the right way, but by some fat chance that it was, then he'd assume that they would take it and not say a word of thanks. It was actually revolting enough that it had his skin crawling as he thought about the parasites he was inundated by. These people, and he used that term loosely, were the cause of the ammunition that took hold of the blonde thoughts and brought down a tide of thoughts dark enough to create a vicious smile on the face of a man who was normally pretty positive. The way they spoke of people like they were pieces in a game really pissed Naruto off. It almost reached the boiling point where he would have butchered them. All their saving grace came in the form of the duty that he felt towards Elia and Rhaenys. His actions may have been controlled to a degree, yet the same couldn't be said for his mind, which was a mess of random thoughts and schemes. During his 2-day tarry in Starfall, he hadn't so much as opened his mouth past the occasional yawn he let out, and it wasn't as difficult to do as one might imagine, since Elia and Rhaenys were being drawn in every direction by aspiring lords and ladies. He was left with no one to really talk to. Not that this bothered him. With his time devoted to wandering through the halls and rooms of Starfall, Naruto had discovered plenty about the castle's layout. He had gotten to the point where he could traverse through the castle with the silence of a shadow. He also learned of all the ways he could escape the castle should the need arise. Right now, however, the enigmatic blonde found himself in his favorite place in the whole castle, an opening near the center of the structure where a trio of trees had grown. It was here that he happened to come upon a bow and some arrows that sat unattended to on a stone bench about 20 or so yards out from the trees. It was the trees that had targets attached to their trunks presumptively for the bow and arrows. Seeing no harm in helping himself, the assassin took up the bow and settled the quiver filled with arrows on his hip, letting his lungs fill themselves on a deep breath that steadied the fast beat of his irritated heart. He lined up 3 arrows on the bow's string before turning the bow so that he was bracing it parallel to the ground. He refined his sharp focus even further and yanked back on the string so that it was ready to fire. That's when he released his breath and ushered 3 arrows that cut through the air prior to piercing each of the 3 targets dead center of their red centers. Any form of achievement he may have felt was quickly killed by visions of those mouthy nobles that came to his mind. They were memories that quickly turned Naruto's eyes into matching pits of frost. Using those faces as motivation, he went for his next sequence of shots. His hands were a blur of movement. In one instant he was able to not only reposition the bow into a more traditional style, but Naruto also notched a new arrow from the quiver that was quivering on his hip. The assassin's aim snapped to the left, and with no hesitation an arrow was sent. It hadn't even had time to strike before he flicked to the Right where that target got a similar treatment before Naruto ended with a stiff arrow straight down the center. When all was said and done, the arrows spoke for themselves. Not only was every single arrow perfectly aimed, but the original arrows were split straight down the middle by their successors. Their wooden shafts were ripped apart evenly and left to curl around the arrow that came after. Then there were the arrowheads of said arrows. The second arrows were almost all the way inside of the targets, and the original ones were wholly buried into the targets thanks to the extra force created by the second barrage of arrows. I don't believe I've ever seen anyone with such a clean shot. It's impressive to watch. Naruto knew that someone was there long before they spoke, so he was far from surprised when Ashera made comment on his showcase of marksman ability, letting his body lack some. He threw the bow over his shoulder before he turned to face the beautiful Lady Dane. There's nothing impressive about hitting a stationary target. Ashera forced herself to take her eyes away from the surprising depth in Naruto's blue sights. She found her excuse to do so in the targets that were left punctured with Naruto's arrows. My brother was trained by the greatest archers in Dorne, and even he'd have trouble replicating that level of precision even if he took his time, the purple-eyed woman remarked with a glassy faraway stare that tarnished the clarity of her crystalline eyes, and it had everything to do with the memories of her brother Arthur. While aware of the melancholy in her look, he decided to not comment on it since it was by no means any of his business. What is it that you want from me, Lady Dane? His words were direct, and they were slightly on the more rude side of things due to his disposition, which was frayed by the castle's toxic upper class. The beauty's eyes reflected a level of annoyance that buried her sadness, and that was due to the way that she was addressed. She managed to keep her little-known temper in check, if only barely. Is it so unbelievable that I'd want to talk with the man who bested the mountain, even if that sounds absurdly impossible in its own right? Her snippiness and doubt only contributed to the nasty brew of emotions building within an angry Naruto. If I didn't beat him, do you think that Elia and Rhaenys would be here and not in some vulture pit outside of King's Landing? He knew his remark was very snide, however there wasn't a part of him that felt bad about being so short with the Dornish noble. Those words provided a conclusive message that painted a picture which made Ashera's face go ashen. The image built up in her mind quickly shifted to include her brother's face, and that only made her horrified look curl down into an unflattering scowl, directing some of the blame for what was happening to her and her family at a faultless Naruto. Ashera barked out an order. Who do you think you're talking to? You will respect me as the lady of this house. Taking her huff for what it was, Naruto countered with a chain of words that were just as freezing cold as the aspect in his eyes. Respect from an assassin like me means that you're a dead woman walking. Is that what you want, my lady? Whether or not it was a coincidence didn't change the fact that a bone-chilling wind broke through the stagnant space alongside Naruto's threat. Lady Dane did her best to brush away the bumps that rose on her arms from that cool wind. She wasn't certain how to explain it, but she supposed it felt like she was underwater. That was how tense she felt. Ashera refused to be some feeble girl. She would be strong like her family was before her, and that meant standing defiant in the face of even assassins. What I want is to know why you didn't kill the mountain, and don't bother with that same excuse you threw at Elia. Naruto spun around so that his back was now facing the angry woman. Instead of answering her demands, he took aim at the targets once more, arrows ready to fly. This time it wasn't a target that he saw, no, he was staring at faces, and they were looking back at him. He let the projectiles loose, and one after the other they struck the spaces where the eyes were located in the faces. THUD, killing Gregor Clegane wasn't enough. The world needs to understand what kind of monster he is. They need to know what the Lannisters allow him to do and command him to do. Rampant murder and merciless rape, and all of it is buried because Tywin Lannister is his shield. Well, not anymore. When I'm done with him, no powerful family or warden will be able to preserve him from the storm that is coming for his hide. A quiet death in the halls of the Red Keep where he is able to hide isn't enough. Yes, he could have slaughtered the mountain as a farmer did with their pig, but why his death could be utilized for something so much bigger than a moment of red revenge. The mountain could be used to change the entire Seven Kingdoms, and if Naruto needed to look like a bad guy to turn the world on its ear, well then he'd proudly wear that scarlet letter. Ashera was forced to revise her views about Naruto. At first she believed him to be a fool who thought that people could change, but that's not what he had in mind, not even close. His vision was so great that solving the unsolvable symptom was not enough. According to him, the only end to this came when the whole system came crashing down. It was ambitious. The noble inside of her should have been concerned about what that kind of attitude could mean for her and hers, yet the part of her that lost so much to this damned game of politics only wished to see how much of the world this assassin could set on fire. In the end, she decided to give him a response that was a blend of both of those factions. People will blame you for not killing that monster when you had your chance. Anything that he does from here until he is stopped is solely on your head. How Naruto's fingers moved against the tail of one of those arrows in the quiver, and the tightening of his grip suggested that he wasn't nearly as calm as he tried to come off as. Look, I'm not some hero who rides in on a white horse. I can't save everyone. If you or anyone else wants to blame me for the choices of anyone I don't kill, then that's fine, but don't expect me to break down because some people might not like me. Pursing her lips in the aftermath of his answer, Ashera looked sternly at Naruto's broad back. It's clear to me that you're no fan of mine. Why is that? The fact was Ashera Dane was used to men being enamored with her from a single glance. That's why Naruto's unwillingness to even take the time to look at her wounded her pride so badly. Why wouldn't he be dying to speak with her like every man that came before him? Men that included the likes of Eddard Stark and Barris Tanselmy. Being here in your castle is a reminder why I detest nobles. You bunch speak as if other people are merely playthings, pieces to be moved in a game that you made up in your heads to make yourselves feel more important than you are. It's sickening. Now, if you'll excuse me. Knowing that he couldn't say any more without squandering what was left of his cool, he marched away from the hushed lady in purple. Ashera ached to scream at Naruto. She wanted to holler at him and let him know that she knew what it meant to lose something, what it meant to feel pain. You don't know anything about me. However, instead of bringing her soul out to bear and getting something sorely needed off her chest, there was only further silence and tears as she watched the silent-footed assassin walk away from her. I can't do this anymore. It's not worth it, not without my family. Past midnight starfall. The nature of his life turned Naruto into something of a nocturnal creature, which is precisely why instead of sleeping he was in bed reading from a small black book. Reading was one of the few ways Naruto preferred to uncompress, which is what he was trying to do as he monitored the waves shattering in the summer sea that existed below starfall. He was set to flip another page in his book when the door to his room slowly pulled open. His reaction to whatever was coming into his room was quelled when he found a sleepy-eyed Rhaenys peeking around the edge of his door. Are you awake, Naruto? Even her voice was sluggish and sounded ready to tuck her out. Rhaenys, being there with her eyes half open and a blanket dragged behind her, was too much for Naruto to do anything but smile at her. Yes, I am Rhaenys. Why aren't you in bed sleeping? He asked gently. Well, Mama came running into the room with Lady Ashera, who was crying. Mama and Lady Ashera were talking and I couldn't fall back asleep. She paused there to look at the ground near her feet, then she looked up, leveling him with the most unfair of expressions, big eyes and all. Can I sleep in here with you, please? For all of the fire he held earlier in the night when talking with Ashera, he may as well have been composed of wet paper now, because Naruto almost instantly folded beneath Rhaenys' imploring eyes. Sure you can. No measure of sleepiness could prevent a happy expression from blooming on Rhaenys' face. The young lady quickly shut Naruto's door and climbed into the bed with Naruto. Leaving her blanket, she wormed under the covers to lay against the side of Naruto's body with her head on his stomach. She sighed and closed her eyes contently. Thanks to Naruto sitting against the headboard, this was actually the perfect position for the sleepy one in pajamas. The warmth that rose from Naruto's body welcomed Rhaenys, and that in turn left her sighing comfortably. Her reaction prompted Naruto to reach down and run his fingers through the brown head of hair resting on his abdomen, unaware that this was the identical thing that Elia did to help Rhaenys relax. It was only a matter of moments before his combing of her hair put Rhaenys to sleep. Her soft snores quickly packed the room as she held onto the side of his body, smiling at her. Naruto whispered a quick goodnight to her before moving back to the text in his other hand. An undetermined amount of time passed before Naruto's door opened again, and this time it was the mother of Rhaenys who rushed in. Naruto, have you seen Ray? The inquiry came out before the worried woman even bothered to look into the room. The answer to her question was obvious, but nevertheless he gestured with his chin to the bundle saddled up at his side under the blanket. Rhaenys said something about you and Lady Dane talking, said that she couldn't fall back asleep. His simple statement made Elia grimace at the thought of what would have befallen her best friend if she was. A few seconds later, what did she tell you? Keeping her voice down to a murmur, Elia stood in the doorway to Naruto's chamber, her body blocking what little candlelight that would have trickled in from the halls adjacent to his room. Nothing more than what I've already said. Why, is there something more to add? The Viper Princess of Dorne slouched down some from her previously upright stance, heaving out a sigh. Elia started with the story of what transpired. I was on my way back from getting a drink when I stumbled upon Ashera ready to climb Palestone Tower. Her hair was a hot mess and her eyes were red from her tears. I heard her talking about throwing herself from the tower when she started to climb out a window to do just that, but I stopped her. Whereas the pity on Elia's face was evident, Naruto didn't show much of a reaction past the widening of his eyes. Internally he did feel some guilt for how heavy-handed he was with Ashera earlier in the night. How was she? Now she is sleeping in my room, but if you want to know any more than that you need to ask her directly." Naruto nodded his head, accepting the confidentiality that she wanted to maintain. "Do you want to take Rainies with you?" All Elia needed was one look at her precious baby to tell Naruto no, with a shake of her head that made her brown hair swing. "If it's okay with you, I'd like to leave her here so she doesn't wake up again." His hand strayed down to tenderly smooth out a portion of Raini's hair that was matted up from being pressed against his body for too long. "That's fine, she can stay here with me, I'll keep her safe," he added to reassure the woman who was only 5, nearing 6 days out from losing her son for the first time in their knowing each other. Elia truly gave Naruto a smile that was for him alone. "You're a real lifesaver, Naruto. Thank you so much for everything." Leaving the landing, being around familiar places and friends started to mellow her out to the kind of person she was prior to the war. She cried a bit more than she did before, but that much could be expected with wounds as fresh as hers. Returning her smile with one of his own, Naruto nodded his head to her. "It's no problem, really. Good night, Elia." "Good night, Naruto." Time skip. The weather last night may have been serene, but Ashera Dane was a storm of emotions that night, just like the rainstorm that fell on Dorne this morning. She took her time walking through the halls of her family's ancestral castle while recalling memories of last night, a night that was almost her last. It was an awful nightmare that roused Ashera from what was a previously restful night. The picture started with her on a battlefield, but no matter what she did, no one seemed able to hear or see her. She meandered through the sights of battle until she stumbled upon Ned Stark running her brother through the gut with a Valyrian sword that she remembered as ice. Over and over again, she heard the wet sound of the sword plunging into Arthur's body. She could even hear it over her incessant screams for Ned to stop. How many times was the motion repeated? Was it 100 times? Was it 1,000 times? In the end it didn't matter, because each time that moment was finished the Northerner turned his dark visage onto her horrified expression. Not that she was staring at anything but the spreading blood blossom that soaked her brother's stomach. When that cruel cycle finally broke itself, it was because she woke up with hot tears already drizzling down her delicate cheekbones. "You were a fool to love that man, the man that murdered your kin," Ashera was whispering, but she didn't need to be any louder than that to repeat her mantra of self-depreciation and loathing. Her repeated words only made the loathing and tears run deeper, till it got to the point that she left her room and strayed through Starfall like a haunting specter tied to the castle's grounds. She was a ghost that had a gentle tap and a path of remorse following behind her. "Mother, father, brother, please tell me what I'm supposed to do." The lost woman cried out to the family that once was to have that constant in her life fully wiped away. It was like having every other beat torn away from her heart. She'd be willing to give anything to hear their voices or see them in any shape one last time, but it wasn't only improbable, it was impossible. Gone was the beauty that Ashera was known around Westeros for, and in its place was a woman who felt like she lost her world. Those same feelings from earlier crept up on the haunted woman, and with them came the crushing weight of helplessness that swallowed her head first. Soon the only idea she could think of was to give up, to take herself and throw her body and her life off the top of Palestone's sword. The length of the castle's halls only compounded things, because they gave her time to think about the grand failure that was her life. Her plagued soul's only release being found in its end. Ashera never made it to the tower, because what she came upon first was an open window. Wanting to end the pain and suffering as soon as she possibly could, she moved to step out of that ajar window. Her foot was about to stray over that boundary when someone took her arm and spun her away from her drastic escape. Her lost purple eyes locked with a fierce but concerned brown, and when Elia spoke, it was to say, "Lady Ashera, Starfall's lady, was pulled out of the events of what was almost a tragic night, thanks to the sound of Naruto calling out her title and name, honing back in on the present time. Ashera recognized that she was standing in the same exact place that she and Naruto met last night. Settling for a quick blink, she forced a smile into place until she took note that the blonde was sitting in the center tree. Ashera opted to stay in the safety of the halls after she glanced out hesitantly into the downpour of rain that fell from the drab sky. "Did you climb into that tree?" Her question was posed with a raised tone and an even further raised eyebrow. Despite living here for years, she couldn't recollect a single time that anyone ever did something so unbothered on Starfall's grounds. Scratching the back of his scalp, Naruto showed Ashera a sleek grin that stretched out the whisker marks on his cheeks. Last night's events pretty much cemented his concerted effort to be polite, if not friendly, to the lady in purple. "Well, I wanted to be outside, but not in the rain," so he left the rest of his statement to linger unsaid but obvious. Much like Elia many times before her, Ashera found that she couldn't believe that Naruto was capable of doing the things that he suggested. The doubt doubled down when she looked at the dark and wet bark of the tree he allegedly climbed. "How did you even manage to make it up there?" Naruto's blue eyes flickered with the creation of an idea. Dropping down from the tree with a minimal splash, he stood rooted under the foliage which blocked out most of the precipitation. The blonde took his hand and stretched it out towards Ashera. With a welcoming grin, "How about I show you instead?" She bit down on her bottom lip as she stared out into the rain for a moment of deliberation, grabbing her dress to lift the fabric so it didn't slink through the water and muck. Ashera hurried out under the arch and allowed the assassin to take her hand that he then used to guide her to the relative shelter under the tree. It was only a few moments, but she still felt the beads of water riding down the waves of her dark hair. When she was amidst the castle's open halls, the sound of the falling water was subdued, but out here the sound was sharp, clear. The sound was fresh. Uncurling her fingers from Naruto, she turned her striking purple hues back on the man. "What now? There isn't much more, but I'm not sure I should do what I need to do, not with a lady like yourself." He put his words together in a purposefully vague way that taunted the beauty beside him in a light-hearted kind of way. Ashera fired a meaningful glance at Naruto as their conversation continued forward in the gray atmosphere of an overcast sky. "I didn't run out here in the rain to not see this through," she reaffirmed herself stubbornly. She couldn't care less about the dress getting wet, but if this was just some ploy to waste her time, then that's when there'd be problems. "Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you." Naruto wrapped an arm around her slender waist and pulled Ashera's chest into his. The warmth of their bodies colliding and the surprise that came from the gesture made Ashera gasp. At the same time, Naruto rocked back on his heels and jumped up into the air. They went high enough that their heads almost broke the canopy of leaves. However, they came down just before it could happen, and that was how both man and woman found themselves sitting on the same branch Naruto was perched upon a few moments ago. Safe and sound, he retracted his arm while Ashera's quick interjection of adrenaline started to fade. Looking down her legs, which were covered by her simple dress, Ashera saw her bare feet dangling off the branch. This is what solidified the recent events in her mind as things that actually happened. "How in the world did you do that?" A snort of amusement spiraled out of the blonde's mouth, and it wasn't because of her slightly frazzled demeanor. He snorted because he was staring at her slips, which were left below in the wet grass where she had been standing. "I train a lot," he said, as if those 4 words explained it all, turning herself towards Naruto with a brow that was furrowed and a tightly squinted gaze. Ashera's expression couldn't further display her confusion. What does that even mean?" It was clear Naruto got a kick out of watching her react to the things he had to say. His smirk was what told that story. Placing his hands down on the branch, he stared out into the rain with a grin and game. What indeed? After that impish response was posed, the pair of people fell into silence. Neither of them did anything more than watch the rain as it fell. Sitting side by side made Naruto and Ashera look like a pair of old friends who were comfortable enough to be silent around the other. Eventually the quiet was broken up by Naruto's regretful voice. "You know, I'm sorry for how I treated you last night." He whispered an apology that was almost lost in the controlled chaos of the rain and its sustained sound. The lady gazed at Naruto through the side of her vision, and that's how she found Naruto looking forward with half-open eyes alongside a softer expression that Ashera didn't know him capable of creating in their limited interactions. Primed with a deep breath, she let out that long exhale before she put her hands in her lap. "Thank you. I should apologize to you as well. What I was feeling is in no way comparable to your problems. If anyone is to blame for how our first meeting went, it is me, so please do not apologize to me." The insistent stiffness in Naruto's tone put the kibosh on any apology that Ashera might have tried to pass his way. She kept her eyes focused on the side of Naruto's whiskered face until he turned his face to meet her eyes, because when he did, she opted to put her focus somewhere else. Their silence took an uncomfortable turn, and it escalated in discomfort until Naruto's voice pierced the shroud of silence once more. "Do you want to talk about it?" He wisely let the implications of his question speak for themselves, since he figured that directly addressing her suicide attempt would lead him to a metaphorical stone wall. "No, I don't, not really." Ashera saw no possibility that included her talking about last night until she settled the thoughts in her head, and that was something she wasn't even close to achieving at this point. The clipper nodded his head with a contemplative hum. The smell of rain and the summer sea weaved with the fragrant scent coming off Ashera. "If you ever do want to talk about it and Elliot isn't around, then I'll lend an ear." Naruto's kind response was one that made Ashera's lips twitch upwards into a smidge of a smile. It held there until the moment after, where her expression drifted back into a more middle-grounded look. "What happened to the cold-hearted heart?" asked Assassin. "That said respect from him meant death," said Assassin, rolled easily into a soft chuckle that was crafted in thanks to the playful slight towards him within the woman's question. "Everyone has their temper, and last night was me getting close to losing mine again. That was something that you didn't deserve, so sorry." "Then I believe I will choose to see your good side." Naruto life is better off spent making friends than in his adversaries. Following this pause, Ashera directed their talk to what she did earlier in the morning, that being talking with Elia and Raini's. The mentioning of the pair gave Naruto reason to smile while she continued on with her rundown. "I also happened to hear something very interesting when Elia needed to leave the room." "And what was it that you two ladies found yourselves talking about?" "Raini's told me about all of the fun things That the two of you did. A giggle came off her lips as she remembered all of the very animated ways that the little lady expressed herself while telling that tale. When she told me how you two ran through the trees like critters, I couldn't believe her. But after this, Naruto chuckled when he thought about the young girl and all of her natural exuberance. From what he had seen, she was getting more and more lively as the days went on. I guess that I can't be too upset. After all, I only said to not tell her mother about our race through the trees. What are your plans after Sunspear? Thanks to the combination of his thoughts and the pause and his focus created by them, Naruto was wholly unprepared for what was asked of him. What was that? He asked for a repeat of what she said. After you bring Elia and Rhaenys back to the south, what will you do then? The Dane beauty repeated herself through a shudder that was due to a rather blustery wind that rocked the open air setting they were in. Hers was a question Naruto hoped to avoid, but here it seemed he had little choice but to answer that innocent inquiry. I haven't given it that much thought honestly. These days have been rather busy. This answer allowed him to fabricate a small lie, but there was also the truth in that answer. The truth was that everyone in Westeros was currently dealing with the fallout of this past week. Then have you thought about staying in Sunspear? Perhaps. I think that the little lady would like that very much. She really looks up to you. You know, she let Naruto in on the observations she had taken away from the things Rhaenys said and how she said them. He was just happy to hear that Rhaenys was focusing on things that didn't involve her little brother's murder. Scraping at his cheek, Naruto looked decidedly unsure about her suggestion. I don't know how I'd do in domestic life. Falling prey to an unladylike cycle of snorts and laughs. Ashera expressed her amusement freely as Naruto sat there with an inclination in his lips. I think that you'd find there's no such thing as domestic life in Dorne. Forget Sunspear. Her joyous claim was an accurate one that sent Naruto into a laugh as well. The two of them sat there laughing for a handful of minutes before the blonde found his words again. Perhaps not. She calmed her breathing, which had been heightened by her laughter, and wiggled her freed toes before she spoke again. It's at least something to think about, Naruto, and whatever the advice that Ashera saw fit to give was stopped shy of being spoken by the heavy sound of two bells ringing. The hollow, slightly in tune sound of the two cast iron bells looping together created a dominating sound that filled every last cranny of Starfall, much to the displeasure of any animal within the premise. That in Naruto, who winced at the raucous sound in his ears, mistaking the way Naruto's face recoiled on itself as confusion. Ashera thought that her conversational partner was curious about what the bells meant. Oh, that's right, you wouldn't know. When I first got word of your approach, I sent the news to Elias Brothers. It seems that Oberyn rode faster than post haste. The Red Viper is here. He never had the pleasure to stand across from the man who was fabled as a pit viper, but that didn't stop Naruto from hearing enough about Oberyn Martell and his travels throughout the continent across the narrow sea. Able to decipher his intent clearly, Ashera decided to try and cut in on whatever plans he might be concocting before we got to meet them. Maybe you'll be able to help me with something, Naruto. She certainly did manage to stop whatever he was thinking about. Instead of continuing with his intentions, he shifted to look at the smiling woman near him. He took note of how her figure still reflected with beauty, even when she was in the middle of a dreary world. What do you need me for? Ashera's purple eyes twinkled like a shooting star while they stared straight into the inquisitive expression put upon Naruto's whisker traits. She thought the way his eyes squinted and head tilted was rather adorable to see up close. It's nothing too strenuous. I'd like it if you were to accompany me as I retrieve something. That's all. Naruto's squint stayed stuck on his face for a few moments longer before giving way to a grin. Sure, I guess I can help you out. Her beautiful smile was the only reaction needed as she sank into Naruto's side. If he was how she got up here, then he'd be the way she got down. Too good. Then let's go. Shaking his head, he coiled an arm around her for security before they plummeted to the ground. Being the taller of the two, Naruto hit the ground first and ended their descent before Ashera even touched the ground. Easing back into her shoes, Ashera was offered one of Naruto's wings. Shall we, my lady? Taken by surprise, her smile returned while she linked her arm with Naruto. It was like this that the two of them strolled out into the rain. Thankfully the rain had lessened and was now a drizzle. An assassin and a gentleman. Is there anything else that you'd like to claim? Shrugging the shoulder that wasn't brushing on Ashera's shoulder, he offered her a response that was just as jestful as her question. I'm a man with many different hats, but telling you about them wouldn't be any fun. You ladies aren't the only ones who like to be mysterious, my lady. She had to let loose another laugh as she tapped on Naruto's quartered forearm with her fingers. No longer were they in the rain, but most of Starfall's halls were just as empty as their last spot. Was probably because they went to see the group arriving from Sunspear. Mysterious indeed, and please call me Ashera. I grow tired of that forsaken title. Always someone who was ready to disperse of formalities. Naruto easily made the change in how he addressed the woman on his arm. So where are we going, Ashera? Ashera was in the process of giving him an answer, but then they walked up to the very window that she almost threw herself out of last night. Seeing it made her body go tense while her eyes froze in their tracks. Her ability to speak was quick to join the group of things not working the tight way that she clutched at his arm wasn't lost on Naruto, and neither was the distinct lack of breathing after her single gasp. Naruto followed her gaze to the window, and got an idea of what was wrong. He shifted forward a step so his body was in between her and the window that he was now blocking out. Ashera's use of her name was the trigger that reactivated her body's natural functioning. Coming to with a second gasp, her fingers dug into the cloth over Naruto's arm. When her eyes came back into focus, she saw Naruto in front of her, and as such it was Naruto that asserted himself into her thoughts. "Why yes, are you alright?" His eyes proved to be polar opposites of the cold pits of ice from last night now. His blue eyes were warmed with concern for her well-being. One person to another she swallowed the nerves lodged in her throat and steeled her soul with the fire inherent to those who lived in the south. Naruto saw her transformation but chose to keep silent. "You don't have to worry about me. Come on, we need to get moving before Elia comes hunting us down." Naruto wasn't totally convinced she was telling the truth, but he trusted that woman knew herself well enough to make that self-evaluation. Together they traveled up 3/4 of the tower when he couldn't help but comment on the tower they were climbing. What is it with nobles and making tall towers? Do they feel sad when they look down at themselves, so they make tall things to look up at and feel proud about? With Ashera laughing freely at the implications of the innuendo, the tense moment at the base of the tower was discarded just as the man and woman reached a closed-off door. The door itself was made of pure ebony wood and was painted with a golden star that was designed to appear as if it was shooting off the door's grainy surface. Unhooking her arm from Naruto, Ashera advanced to the door and opened it. With the door open, she turned over her shoulder to give Naruto a smirk. "Please come." And following her into the room, the first thing that he observed was a mural painted onto the rounded roof that loomed overhead, painted to imitate the dark, unpropitious skies of Dorne. Each inch of the circle was distinctive as it gradually narrowed towards the center, where it combined into a constellation fashion like a greatsword. Next attempt, his eye was an actual sword that was stood vertically against a glass gantry that was stained black. The actual length of the blade was encased in a ceremonial glass sheath that increased the magnanimous glow shedding off the sword. Its brilliant light made it tough to see the details on the blade, but he could see its hilt, designed to resemble a four-pointed star. The star's tips were stretched out so they could coil around the square-like protrusions that extended out at the sides to form a handguard. More than its impeccable craftsmanship, Naruto could sense the energy in the air. He felt the aura that the weapon exuded was more than the sheet of light permeating from the metal. There was no denying in his mind that this weapon was special. It might be something even greater than the legendary steel of old Valeria, and that was saying something. "This is the Sword of Morning Dawn. This is my family's most prized treasure, a weapon made from a falling star. It is bestowed upon a warrior who has proven himself as both a powerful fighter and a man of strong character." Ashera's brief description of the radiating sword may as well have been the whispers of a goddess that was explaining her craft, because this great sword she spoke of looked simply divine. "It was my brother's sword until he was killed at the Tower of Joy." And as easy as that, the mystique of the moment was shattered by the cold, unforgiving hammer that was reality. Naruto looked to his side to see Ashera's teary expression was only made more sullen by the light of dawn. The echo of his footsteps followed in his shadow as Naruto stepped towards the tearful Lady Dane. When he was close enough, he laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. He gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture to show her that she wasn't alone. Ashera shut her eyes, steadied her lip, and lifted her head with the pride only someone of noble origins could truly pull off. "Normally Dawn would remain here until a new Sword of Morning is named, but I fear what will become of Starfall with my departure." Naruto's gaze flicked down to the woman who was half a head shorter than him, and that was without and true heels in her shoes. His gaze carried no small amount of surprise in it. "Your departure," he repeated back to Ashera. With his brow dropped down and an eyebrow lifted, she wiped away the proof of her tears before nodding her head. "Yes, Elia asked that I return with her to Sunspear. Like when we were children, I agreed and transferred lordship of Starfall to my younger brother Sirik. He is well-intentioned, but I have my concerns with his ability to lead, so I'll be taking Dawn with me so that I know it's safe." Arthur would have liked that. From there, Ashera walked out from beneath Naruto's hand to the only piece of furnishing in the room. Outside of the ancestral Dane's sword, it was a desk with a drawer that was maybe 3 feet in length. She opened that drawer and out came a folded-up purple cloak. She wasn't facing him, but her voice came to his ears. "All the same, this is a cloth that was made from the same meteor that Dawn was forged from, ground down and woven into the cloth. The particles from the meteor make it so the only thing able to destroy the cloth is the fire from a dragon of at least 10 cycles, or so the stories say." Turning back around, she had the purple fabric draped over the top of her forearm. That's incredible. What more could he say to follow up a story that included an actual star falling? Naruto, will you hold on while I wrap it up with its covering, please? It's a touch too heavy for me to hold by myself. She made her request, revealing the true reason she asked the assassin to climb the tower with her. Are you sure? He asked, sounding apprehensive about handling such a vital piece of the Dane family history. One of her finely tuned brows picked up before a teasing smirk formed on her lips. I'm not asking you to carry Dawn into your next fight. All you have to do is hold on to the sword while I get it set for our journey, and maybe hold on to it while we travel. He rubbed at his head and chortled lamely at his own overreaction. I guess you're right. Naruto walked to Dawn and gently lifted the weapon away from its stand. He had one hand on the glass sheath and the other wrapped around the hilt. Even like this, he could taste the surge of invigorating power flowing through the weapon, but he shook it off like this. The purple lady nodded her head as she went about the process of wrapping the blade twice around so the fabric was snug from its point down to the hilt. When it was to her liking, she secured the cloth with two specially forged pins that were topped with miniature stars. Wonderful. Now I believe there are guests that I need to greet, and you are coming with me, my trusty sword holder. Wait a minute, did I just get turned into your pack mule? You were right, you do wear a lot of hats. I'm telling you, sister, it's not as bad as you've been hearing. So you're telling me that you don't have multiple lovers? Oberyn Air. Well, I am a young man. Unbelievable. This is the conversation that Ashera and Naruto walked in on. Ashera was the one to introduce themselves to the rest. It looks like you two are having fun, she snarked with a mischievous smirk. She'd always loved to watch the siblings bicker back and forth, and that hadn't changed. Naruto Rhaenys, who was ecstatic to see Naruto, ran right at the blonde and jumped into him, which left him with no other option than to catch her, adjusting Rhaenys so she wouldn't slip. He smiled at the young lady. Now he had a wrapped sword in one hand and a child not much older than 5 in his other. Naruto painted quite a picture to behold. Hello Rhaenys, how are you doing? He asked ever kindly to the child barely past 5, named days old. A pout welled up on Rhaenys' face as she glared cutely at the blonde assassin, who was clearly amused with her reaction. Where were you? You said that we'd play today, she scolded Naruto, oblivious to the varying looks on the faces of the people around them. Snickering ever so slightly, he nodded his head to admit that there was truth to her words. I did, but then Ashera asked for my help. Rhaenys blinked because it was like Naruto broke the seal that kept them in their own world. She looked at Ashera, who was standing next to them looking as entertained as Naruto was. Wow, you look really pretty today, Lady Ashera. The girl complimented the lady with a naturally benevolent smile. Ashera smiled brilliantly at Rhaenys. Thank you, my dear, she responded in a gentle tone while she also ran her purple painted fingers through a section of Rhaenys' hair. This touch turned Rhaenys' smile that much brighter. Shaking his head at the two, Naruto turned his eyes onto Elia, who was watching the scene unfold with a warm expression. Good morning, Elia. I hope you slept well. Elia nodded her confirmation. I did, Naruto. Thank you for asking. There was a cough from her side which wrangled her attention to the gentleman that was standing on her flank. Fine, don't be such a baby, Naruto. This is my younger brother Oberyn Martell. Oberyn, this is Naruto, the man who saved Rei and me during the sack. Striding up to Naruto confidently was a young man with a mysterious look about him. He was tall, lithe, and fit of body, which was the perfect combination for the sureness that Naruto saw in his graceful steps. Like Elia and Rhaenys, Oberyn had the typical Dornish dark eyes and hair. His hair was in the process of being grown out of what was shaping up to be a widow's peak style. Pleasure to see you again, Ashera. The two Dornish shared a courtesy nod before Oberyn's searching stare locked with Naruto, who didn't flinch away from the intense eyes he was being leveled with. I'd shake your hand, but you seem to have them full. With Dawn settled against his left shoulder and Rhaenys on his right side looking at the sword, he had very little to greet Oberyn with other than his words. The Red Viper, it's a pleasure to meet you. They were talking about your performance in the pits when I last visited Essos. The duelist's mouth curled up into a deadly smirk that paired nicely with his sharp nose. It was my first visit of many, but all I needed was one stay for the people to know my mark. He shifted his posture and glanced at the spear on his back, a weapon taller than him by several feet. Anyone that leaves enough red in the pits will be remembered for their efforts, Naruto remarked, more than aware of the bloodthirsty nature that the men and women in the pits exhibited. Though some were only there because of the masters, it was still the prevailing attitude in that world of bloodshed. Although he saw no reason to contest the truth, Oberyn would not be silent. Speaking of Red, you and I need to have words about what you did or didn't do back in the Red Keep. That certainly sounded like a warning to Naruto. Before he had the chance to delve further into the subject, Elia stepped between the two with a frown for her brother. Oberyn, you said you wouldn't go there, she stated with a low voice that wasn't pleased in the slightest. But no buts, you'll be helping me gather my things until you cool down. Putting her foot down, the older sister dragged her younger brother away while he complained and resisted the entire way. Rhaenys giggled as she watched them go. Dropping down from Naruto's arm, she waved at the two adults left behind by Naruto. Lady Ashera, turning around, the little one gave chase to the siblings. Wait for me, mama, uncle. It was only once the partial family of Martells was gone did Ashera finally break into a soft string of giggles, and there they go, using the hand on the arm that Rhaenys vacated. Naruto rubbed at the back of his head. Yup, that was interesting. His unsure comment only intensified Ashera's giggle into a laugh that went on until she silenced herself with a shake of her head. Elia's right, we should get ready for the trip to Sunspear. And since you don't have anything with you, Naruto, you can help me. Naruto blinked and turned his skeptic blue eyes to Ashera's honey-sweet smile. And how do you figure that? Ashera may have turned out to be cooler than first thought, but Naruto wasn't looking to become her personal transporter. You're already carrying Dawn for me, so why not help with the rest? Naruto wasn't really given the chance to dispute her because she took off quicker than Naruto thought she was capable of. Let's go, Naruto, you don't want to get lost. He watched her hair sway on her back. With every cheerful step he sighed and begrudgingly trudged after the woman. At least she's in a better mood now. Sunspear was the place of power from which House Martell ruled the realm of Dorne. The area around Sunspear was perhaps the most peculiar in all of the 7 realms. Not only was the keep built in the southernmost portion of land in Westeros, but it was built among the desert, which kept limiters on the number of settlements that Dorne could possess at any given time. Sunspear was no different. It was a place for people that was surrounded by walls, 3 of them to be exact. These winding walls encircled one and another, creating mile after mile of narrow alleyways, hidden establishments, and frantic bazaars. Even the old keep that the Martells once used, Sandship, was located in the city of Twisting Paths. Naruto wasn't given as much time as he would have liked to explore the city that was more akin to a nomad settlement, but from his limited exposure, he could tell that the Dornish were a group of people who enjoyed life. The women were beautiful and bronze, and the men were passionate and deadly. The mud brick buildings and simple hovels that many called home didn't dampen that spirit. Where most of Sunspear, the Shadow City included, was low to the ground and simple. The old palace was grand and sky-reaching, casting long shadows that looked like fingers whenever the sun sunk behind Sunspear. The new keep was the perfect example of how the Roynish influence changed how things were done in Westeros. I'm happy that I got that lining of Shadowcat fur under my armor. Before this, the desert does get cold at night. Sneaky climate. During the first period of travel out of Starfall, he was taken up with thoughts of what Sunspear would be like, but he quickly realized that the desert demanded every bit of his attention if he wanted to survive it. These were the thoughts he pondered as he sipped on a sample of fine Dornish red wine. This is how he was when the doors in front of him opened and a guard stepped out. Prince Doran, we'll see you now. Nodding, Naruto placed his cup down and followed the man into the Tower of the Sun's main room, where Elia Oberyn and a man sitting in a throne inlaid with a golden spear were waiting for him. An older man of around 30 years sat on the throne of Dorne. From a glance, Naruto could tell that this man was the exact opposite of Oberyn. This man was weary, pensive, and subtle in his gestures. Naruto also noted that Doran Martell didn't have a very striking figure. It was an average figure that could easily be counted as unassuming, though there was very little unassuming about the stress wrinkles dotting the man's paling face. The sunshine-haired assassin stared straight at Doran, and Doran did the same at Naruto. He expected a bow from the blonde because it was the respectful thing to do, but nothing happened. The silent conflict between the two grew and grew until Oberyn broke through the stagnant silence with a cough. It was the nudge needed to move this meeting on. So you're the man to defeat the mountain and save my sister, Doran said with a calm kind of voice that only the most political of lords could obtain. He was by far tired of hearing that kind of sentiment when it came to mountain, and as such he forcefully stomped out the urge to roll his eyes at Doran. Or so everyone continues to tell me, Naruto replied with a bit of bite in his voice. His answer caused a number of the guards in the room to eye him up angrily for the disrespect shown to their lord. Doran wasn't happy with the attitude, not by a long shot, but he was used to dealing with brash young men thanks to Oberyn and his salty attitude. Yes, they do tell me this, Naruto. What are your plans now that you've fulfilled your promise to my sister and my niece? Looking up at the man who was elevated slightly above where he was rooted, Naruto shrugged in return. Get some food, get some rest, and then see where the wind takes me. Behind Naruto, the Viper Princess eyes fell to the ground and a frown rolled up on her lips. Her reaction to his answer went unheeded by everyone apart from Oberyn, who was the closest to Elia. The ruling head of Dorne had no qualms with that and nodded his head. Then we can talk about a reward for the safe return of my family. What is your price? Stopping him there with a shake of his head, Naruto breathed out a quick sigh through his nostrils. I Already told Elia that I'm not doing this to be rewarded. No one asked me to step in and save her and Rhaenys, so no one will pay me for it. Doran looked piercingly at the blonde, searching for something that he just couldn't find. He frowned in the end because he didn't yearn to be in debt to someone as unknown as this man was to him. Such mystery made him hard to predict. I must insist that you let Doran do something for you this time. Naruto's sigh pushed out under his breath. Simply put, he didn't want to have this discussion a second time with yet another stubborn Doran producing one of his 3 remaining kunai. Naruto ignored the guards putting their hands on their weapons. He held the kunai in front of his face and spoke around it. Have you ever seen these around? Sunspear nudged shook that a guest had managed to bring a weapon into the room without him knowing. Doran was clearly on edge in his seat. No, I haven't, he said quicker than what was characteristic of him. Then you can't help me, Naruto said, simply slipping his kunai back into his armor. If that was all you wanted to speak about, then I'll be excusing myself. He framed it as a question, but it was certainly a statement that Naruto followed through with. Elia saw Doran gripping tightly on the arms of his chair, but she passed that detail over as she followed Naruto out of the room. Naruto, wait, she called out after him before he could start the time-consuming descent down the Tower of the Sun. What used to be a look of indifference was long gone as Naruto turned around. In its place was a friendly smile meant for Elia. What's up? Elia linking her fingers together at her waist. Elia bit on her lower lip. She needed a moment to gather her thoughts before she could answer his question. Were you serious about leaving Sunspear so soon? No, his lips fell downward, not into a frown, but he wasn't smiling any longer. Yeah, I think I'll find something to do. I keep on moving. Elia did not like that answer. Ever since Naruto appeared in her life, there was a certain level of comfort that was difficult to describe, and that extended to Rhaenys as well. Not only had he achieved the impossible, but he also was able to keep Rhaenys' mood up in the clouds. Naruto gave her a somewhat normal life, and that wasn't even including how Elia felt about the enigma of a man that was in front of her. What do I feel for him? Just like how it happened before, but for different reasons. This time Elia wasn't able to think on that question. This time it was because Naruto kept their conversation going, seemingly oblivious to the inner debate occurring within the Martell princess. I won't be leaving right away. Alright, so maybe he wasn't that oblivious. Not right away still wasn't long enough for Elia. What if I hire you to do a job for me to protect Rhaenys and me? Come again? I'm no fool. Naruto, after the dethroning of the Targaryens and the disappearance of the queen, there is not a more immediate threat to Robert Baratheon's reign as king of the 7 realms than my daughter. I no longer hold claim since my marriage was annulled, but Rhaenys is still in line through succession, Elia stated with a solemn softness in her voice. The politics of the Iron Throne were ruthless even to those who had no choice but to be born into the game. Like her daughter, Rhaenys wants to be the queen. Never once in their many talks was the idea mentioned in form or fashion, so this came as quite a surprise to Naruto. Elia shook her head negatively, the pale circlet around her forehead contrasting with her tan skin. No, she doesn't, and I wouldn't want her to live in that toxic place, queen or not. The problem is that neither the king nor his council knows that Rhaenys isn't a threat to them. Robert may be a man of war, but I don't think him to be one that will order the death of children, Naruto said, unsure about this whole arrangement that was being proposed. Maybe Elia was just being a mother who was overreacting to things. It was certainly possible. No sooner did a hateful scowl tear up Elia's concerned visage. Our informants in King's Landing said that Robert was seen standing over Aegon's body wrapped in rags, and he smiled. He smiled at the sight of my dead child. Naruto recoiled, not because Elia shouted at him, but because the information was so jarring to hear. The lack of humanity, as shocking as it was detestable. With Naruto left in a state of shock, Elia was free to continue her tirade of anger. If he is happy enough to gloat over an infant, then he will certainly try and do the same to Rhaenys. Elia, taking one of Naruto's hands in between her palms. The mother looked right into Naruto's blue eyes imploringly. Please, Naruto, don't let them steal Rei's life. Because she was born to the wrong side of a war, she deserves to have a life like you and me. Please. If the situation wasn't so intense, Naruto would have taken note of how soft Elia's hands were against his skin, steadying his expression and removing any sign of uncertainty after that plea. Naruto smiled comfortingly at Elia. Okay, Elia, I'll take the job. An unstoppable wave of relief raced through Elia's body. She didn't cry, but she did surprise Naruto when she slumped forward to give him a hug. Speaking straight into his shoulder, she provided him with as tight of a squeeze as her fragile body could provide. Thank you so much, Naruto. There should be no doubting that Elia did this because Naruto made Rhaenys happy and could keep her safe, but she also did this because there was a portion of her that also enjoyed having the assassin around. Something Elia was becoming more aware of the longer they were together, more used to this kind of contact than he was a week ago. Naruto wrapped his arms around her upper back respectfully and returned her embrace. I wouldn't be interrupting something, would I? The next one to speak was Oberyn Martell. His tone was light and full of a suggestion that was bordering on something promiscuous, a feeling he was more than familiar with. Whipping Around on her brother Elia ripped herself from Naruto's arms with a healthy supply of red in her face. Was that red anger or was it embarrassment? Oberyn, are you trying to make me angry? Oberyn knew what that low tone meant for him, which is why he threw his hands up placatingly. I only tease my dear sister. I'm actually here to talk with Naruto about something. The man of the hour lifted his brow in confusion. Me, what could Oberyn need to talk to him about? Yes, you. How about you and I go out and have a friendly competition? The way that his hand moved towards the spear on his back was not lost on Naruto or Elia. That's not a good idea. Dorn wouldn't be very happy with me if word got out that I did harm onto one of their princes, Naruto retorted with a mocking sort of smirk. He couldn't even think of the last time someone had the balls to challenge him to a fight. Sharpening his dark coal-like eyes, Oberyn found himself frowning. You think you could beat me? The fact that the whiskered man was so sure of himself only insulted the warrior inside of Oberyn that much more. I am a man who is trained and proficient in killing other men and women, so yes, I think that I'd emerge the winner, though I don't doubt that you will fight me tooth and nail. The pause in Naruto's answer and the subsequent softening of his stance happened because a concerned Elia grabbed at the back of his arm, making it clear that she didn't want to see the two of them fight. It so happens that I disagree, so what better way to settle this than to put our problem into action? Oberyn's laser focus was parked on Naruto and him alone. That single-minded need to test Naruto made sure that he failed to notice smaller things like his sister's reaction to his demands. Naruto looked into the area past Oberyn. His gaze was vacant as he chewed on the inside of his cheek. The blonde mulled over his options for a handful of moments when he finally gave his answer. How about a hand-to-hand fight? No weapons. No weapons. Where's the fun in that? One didn't need to look any further than the slight pickup in Oberyn's voice to know that he was protesting that potential option. Recalibrating his attention back on Oberyn, Naruto shook his head languishly. With weapons there's no fun for me. If I win then I have Dorn on my ass, and if I lose then my body is torn up. No weapons or no fight. There was a clear distaste on Oberyn's face. What Naruto suggested went against everything he wanted in a fight, but beggars could not be choosers, so it was with a sigh that he relented by nodding his head. Fine, we'll do it your way. Tomorrow when the sun is at its highest it will be me and you. Ultimately getting what he wanted, he delivered that final line before he turned around and decided to spend some time in his favorite brothel here in Sunspear. Naruto was motionless until he heard Elia's sigh. He turned around to face her again with an apologetic smile worked into place. Sorry Elia, I tried to tone it down to make it as safe as possible. He seems like the type of guy who doesn't take no for an answer. Elia sighed again. In short order. No, you're fine Naruto. Oberyn has always been like this since he was but a boy. At the very least I won't have to worry about swords or spears. Her answer created a sly smirk in her companion. Worried for who exactly? For me or for Oberyn? His freewheeling teasing caused Elia to color slightly. In the future she'd work to be less prone to teasing, but for now she huffed it off and marched towards the steps of the tower. Shut up Naruto, let's go. You promised Rhaenys you'd take her and explore Sunspear, and I'm coming along. She left, followed by Naruto and his laughter. Next day people from all around Sunspear gathered just outside of Sunspear's first gate where open space existed. The crowd consisted of common folk, guards, shop owners, whores, and even some of the nobility like Elia and Ashera. They had together as one formed a ring, and were waiting for the bout to begin. Naruto and Oberyn were standing silently in the middle of all the commotion, neither man taking their eyes off the other. This is stupid and a waste of time and energy. Elia was not shy in letting how she felt be known to Ashera, who had joined her in viewing this spectacle forced onto Naruto by Oberyn. Ashera provided a short nod. True, but you can't tell me that you aren't interested in seeing Naruto fight. She certainly wanted to see the man who bested the mountain in action. I suppose you have a point, Elia conceded with a frown. The mere fact that she admitted what she did made her feel uncomfortable. Or maybe that unease was because memories of the mountain were invoked in her mind. Besides, it's not like the view is unpleasant. Growing up along, Elia left Ashera with a familial bond with this generation of Martells. This meant that she was talking about Naruto when speaking about pleasing sights. I would have never guessed that Sarah Sasson had a body like that hidden beneath his clothes. From their angle they could see very well Naruto's body, which was quite bare and tanned from his waist up. Ashera and Elia, along with everyone else, could see how his abdomen rippled with his measured breathing, how his biceps flexed through the motions of his arms, and how his broad back pulled taut under his tanned skin anytime he shifted positions. Lady Dane slowly stopped tracing the contours in Naruto's muscles with her eyes long enough to see that a handful of women in the crowd were just as obvious with their silent appreciation of the fighter that caught her eye, though most were leering at Oberyn for he was the prince, and it looks like some of the other girls Here, agree with me, Ashera, Elia whispered sharply to avoid garnering any attention from those around them. She even slapped her friend on her arm, but that didn't stop the red in her cheeks from deepening as her best friend laughed openly, smirking at Elia. Ashera's purple hues gleamed in glee as they took in Elia's flustered face. Your time in King's Landing has taken a grip of you. Don't forget that we are Dornish, and we enjoy the better things in life. I'm sure that Naruto wouldn't mind the attention. The work he put into that body certainly deserves some appreciation. I guess you're right, Elia murmured, but never clarified on what part Ashera was correct about. Instead of doing that, her eyes took the time to take a measure of the defined rigid lines of muscle on the blonde who just finished his stretching routine. Unless you have other ideas in mind for your savior. Before Ashera was properly chastised by her embarrassed best friend, the anticipation around the fight was brought to a stop when Oberyn finally spoke out. Okay, we've wasted enough time here. Are you ready to fight? Naruto grinned at the bold man. I'm always ready to brawl. Oberyn, do you want to back out? This is your last chance to keep that noble face of yours clean. I'm no craven assassin. Even without my lovely spear, I have plenty of thrust. You can ask my dears in the crowd. If you don't believe me, there was a collapsing crush of giggling from the numerous amount of lovers Oberyn had in the crowd, both man and woman. He was down for banter back and forth, but Naruto's fuse was running thin, as is enough with the pomp and pageantry. Fight if that's your wish. Oberyn spent no time springing into a charge, forward pacing. Oberyn opened with a volley of jabs that lit up Naruto's chest with strikes. The sound of his fists on Naruto's body was dull and repetitive, but none of the blows did any lasting damage. What it did prove was that Oberyn could barrel ahead faster than Naruto could pedal backward. Naruto was left on the back foot for so long that eventually he backed up into the ring of people, constraining them. The crowd of people who certainly weren't on his side shoved him forward, quickly working his feet so he didn't trip. Naruto dipped under Oberyn's incoming strike and scored a clean blow to Oberyn's kidney. The impact was quick and decisive. It was an impact that made Oberyn gasp and buckle at the knees. Taking advantage of the chance, Naruto slid behind Oberyn, where he followed up with a stiff forearm shiver to Oberyn's lower back, which fully collapsed. The Red Viper, backing up, Naruto patiently waited for his foe to clamber back to his feet, growling beneath his breath. The prince shed the sand from his hair before approaching a second time. Here he was more cautious as he slowly stalked Naruto back to the center of their makeshift ring. When Oberyn thought he had a moment to pounce, he was drilled with a leg kick from the blonde, a kick that lifted his foot from the ground. This time Oberyn hissed in pain while he tentatively placed his foot back on the ground. He attempted to come back in, but again he was thumped with a kick. This time it was the inside of his left leg being knotted up by Naruto's heavy kicks. Oberyn stumbled back from Naruto to help manage the dull pain in his shins. He forced himself to breathe and think, ready to go. Oberyn came in for the third time. This time he was waiting for Naruto and jumped over the attempted kick. He was midair when Naruto's punch came in, but that didn't stop the Dornishman from catching Naruto's wrist. When he landed, he pulled Naruto's arm around until his bicep was pinned against his Adam's apple. Standing in Naruto's shadow, the Martel kept the pressure on the choke by placing his other hand against the back of Naruto's arm. Hearing every tiny wheeze from the blonde, just like a snake constricting, he wrapped his legs above Naruto's waist and both went down into the sand. The hot earth didn't stop Oberyn from continuing to squeeze the life from Naruto. A wide-shouldered man with white hair and a 6-foot-long axe stood in place, watching the two younger men scrum. Despite being adorned in heavy metal armor, he didn't show any signs of discomfort from the hot desert sun. This man was Ario Hoda, the head of the guard here in Sunspear. Though he wasn't reacting like the men and women around him, Ario was keeping an eye out in case Prince Oberyn was in any life-threatening danger. Back in the fight, Naruto tried to wiggle his way out of the choke, but 10 seconds went by and his intakes of air were getting less effective. By the gasp, he made use of his free hand to spring the snare that Oberyn made with his legs, planting that same hand over Oberyn's shoulder. Naruto rolled his body back with his hand, wrist, head, and neck bracing his weight. Naruto flipped himself into the dominant position. The assassin went for a palm strike to Oberyn's nose, but the Red Viper saw what was coming and managed to roll out of the way in time. When he felt only hot sand spreading between his digits, Naruto turned to look at Oberyn and got a face full of sand for his troubles. Blinded by the sand and feeling it stinging his eyes, Naruto wasn't able to prevent himself from being slugged across the face by Oberyn. Naruto hit the ground and was instantly mounted by Oberyn, who rained down a flurry of sharp firsts upon him. They're really going at it, Ashera pointed out, the obvious strangely fixated on the sight of the two men trying to beat the life out of Each other. Elliot used the rowdy crowd as a distraction. It was less time with her eyes on the fight. This way the people are enjoying it. The words perhaps too much were left unsaid. She may have had eyes on the fight, but her ears were more than capable of soaking in every profanity, scream and call for more violence. Yes, this seems more violent than even the joust tourneys. I just hope that it's over soon. It took 3 facial smashes for Naruto to feel out his foe's pattern well enough to get his arms up in a position where they could absorb the fists that were now tenderizing his forearms. With the intense heat of the high sun and being locked in a 5-minute-long fight, Naruto built up a sweat that helped wash away some of the sand stuck in his eyes. He got his eyes open enough to discern a fist coming down on him, and from there he was able to respond by catching Oberyn's left hand at the wrist. Naruto's sudden resistance caught Oberyn by surprise. The Red Viper did his best to wrench his trembling limb from Naruto's grasp, but couldn't quite get loose. Trying something else, Oberyn sought to switch over to his right hand and hit Naruto in the jaw again. However, as he shifted his focus, Naruto pulled back on his wrist, and there was a snap that made the civilians and non-combatants in crowd grimace. Unbridled to his self-control, Elias' younger brother shrieked at the intense pain. He rolled off of Naruto, going as far as he could. Both men were deposited in the sand, nursing their own injuries as their sweating bodies were dotted and clumped on with wet sand. Taking 10 seconds to themselves, both men rose to their feet, panting heavily. Oberyn was sporting a heavy bruise on his lower left side, a discolored bulge growing on the inside of his right shin, a dripping laceration on his lower back, and bloodied red knuckles. Naruto wore a cut beneath his hairline, a slice on his swollen lip, and red irritated eyes that were precariously avoiding a stream of blood dripping out of that hairline cut. Their collective state left Sunspear's Maester Kaliat looking visibly ill. Kaliat was a man barely reaching the height of 5 feet. He was a bald man who clearly enjoyed his food, and while he may have been the Maester, that didn't mean he handled the environment well. Oh my, I do hope this finishes soon. My skin just can't handle this unbearable sun. Speaking about unable to change one's temperament, Oberyn went on the attack again. Even though he was restrained to a single hand, he tried to kick at Naruto with lashes of his long limbs, but Naruto danced out of his range easily, much to Oberyn's anger. When the tired Viper started to slow down from going for nearly 12 minutes straight, Naruto caught his leg and pinned it to his side. The two men locked gazes, and Naruto swept the one wheel that Oberyn had to stand on the door and went to the sandy ground in a puff, and this time it was Naruto on top. Oberyn did his best to defend himself, but with only one good arm he was slowly picked apart by Naruto's surgically precise strikes. When he tried to protect his face with his arm, Naruto went for the sides of his head and vice versa. Thankfully for Oberyn, the punishment didn't last long. Not so fortunately, Naruto ended it all when he wrung Oberyn's jaw with a massive hooking fist that knocked the Red Viper out by rattling his entire skull. Some of Sunspear's guards came running in, but Naruto lifted his arms and slowly backed away from the men who had head wraps, golden robes, and spears. Breathing heavily, Naruto watched as people began to form around the prince with his eyes down in the sand and his ears filled with the thumping of his heart. He didn't pick up on much of anything as he began to walk away from the gathering. The victorious blonde was stopped in his tracks when a hand fell upon his hot sweating body. The muscles beneath his skin tensed up in case he needed to defend himself. That tension deflated when he looked up from the ground to see Ashara's purple eyes on him. "Do you need something?" Naruto asked in a hoarse voice that was created in part by some dry sand that found itself in his mouth. "I might not need something, but you need someone to help you clean up," Ashura commented with a passing glance at the mixture of blood and sand on his frame. Naruto went to chuckle off her statement, and he did until his laughter forced him to spit up some of the sand that was stuck inside of his maw. Calming himself after the rough coughs that tortured his throat, Naruto smiled at her. "Thanks for the concern, but I can take care of myself." Independence was one of the things he treasured most in this lifestyle of his. Ashura planted her hands on her hips in response to his refusal of her aid. "You mean just like how you handled yourself and got into a fight?" she asked him condescendingly. He prodded at the cut corner of his lip with his tongue and winced when there was a responsive shot of sharp pain. "It's not like I had much of a choice. Oberyn wanted this fight, and nothing would have changed that." She shook her head with immediate exasperation. "Of course you'd use that as an excuse. I swear you men aren't happy unless you're beating on something," she said with a sigh left quite plainly for her blonde companion. Naruto's eye twitched at the way that Ashura painted him, feeling slighted by her broad brush strokes. "Hey now, House Dane's former leader easily discarded." Naruto's surge of indignation. "Well, these wounds won't clean themselves." Before Naruto could complain like she knew he would, Ashura took Naruto by his arm and began to drag him towards the city. The tired assassin smeared streaks of blood over his temple when he attempted to wipe the lifeblood away. "I didn't say that I'd come with you, please let me go," he muttered with annoyance at the way he was being dragged about without his consent. "How about this then? If you don't follow me, then I'll go around telling everyone how the winner of the fight came to me demanding that I be his prize," Ashera stated boldly, peering through her long hair at Naruto with a devious quality. In her purple eyes it was no exaggeration. Naruto's jaw literally dropped open at the blatant extortion he was being subjugated to. "What are you talking about? I never even thought of something like that." Her smile was downright beckoning as her answer flowed from her lips like water. "But they don't know that, and I have a way of persuading people to see my way of things. You're evil more to buy himself some time than to insult her." Naruto followed up with that piece as he tried to figure some way out of this. Ashera was unmoved as she fluttered her eyes at Naruto. "You say the sweetest thing to me, Naruto, so what's your answer?" "You know, I think I liked you better when you thought I disliked you." Naruto's mumble made Ashera laugh cheerily. "Fine, you win this round." "Oh Naruto, I always win later on, sometime later on, and more gold than that." Ashera managed to secure an entire bathing room to drag a reluctant Naruto into. The room wasn't anything extravagant like the Martells had in the keep, but it was serviceable enough to do the job that Ashera and Naruto needed it to do. It was here that Naruto was perched on a wooden stool while Ashera stood behind the blonde with a bucket of water and two clean cloth on a stool that was next to her for convenience. The room itself was quiet, but the noise from the area around the building still drifted in when it spiked. "I meant to ask, how did Elia take the whole thing?" "I know she didn't want to see it happen, but," Ashera nodded her head, "Elia most definitely didn't want to watch the scrap. She went with Oberyn back to the palace, but she did ask that I make sure you were fine too, always looking out for someone, that girl." As Naruto felt a sigh slowly crawl through him because he was already savoring the cool and much darker setting that the bathing room provided them. Now that he was here and out of the heat, he was much more receptive to the idea of someone else looking after his sweaty, sluggish body. "What's it look like?" Ashera was in the middle of dabbing a cloth against the side of the bucket, but she stopped to look up at the back of his head. "There's a cut under your hairline and one on your lower lip, plus your eyes are still a little red, but on the bright side the swelling went down. I'm going to start now. Try not to jump out of your skin." Her teasing barb quickly fell to the wayside, and she started with Naruto's left arm when she began the thorough process of wiping away the sand and grime that built upon the blonde's bare upper half. She was gentle, but also firm as she shaped her hand and the cloth over it around his wrist flush to his body. She carefully ran the cleansing fabric along his arm. The dirt was expelled 1 inch at a time until she got to his bicep. Once there, she was unable to stop herself from squeezing Naruto's muscle, the very same one that she was admiring about 30 minutes ago. For a moment she was totally enraptured by the way his firm muscles fought against the pressure exerted by her fingers. The strength there made her wonder about the kind of things the owner of these muscles could do, and they aren't even bulky and obscene. She marveled to herself when she realized what she had done. Ashera looked to the profile view of Naruto's face, and to her relief she found that he was sitting there contently with his eyes closed, easily breathing out for herself. She rolled the wet cloth over the top of Naruto's broad shoulder to the nape of his neck. She used a gentle hand to guide Naruto's head to the other side so that she could wipe away at the sediment on the side of his neck and throat. She did the very same for his other arm and shoulder, and both were finished with 2 dabs that cleaned behind Naruto's ears. Ashera took a step back with her first bit of work done. At this point she was able to watch an array of water trickle down Naruto's back, watch as it branched out and formed different pathways that got gradually more dirty as they rolled over dirt and sand. Ashera took in how calm her friend, if that's what they were, was breathing, and watched the way that his back's muscular areas tensed up on every inhale and then eased when he exhaled. She fell into this visual lull for a number of moments before she dipped the cloth back into the bucket of cold water. Her hands made sure to wring out the fabric so it wasn't dripping wet before she took that cool cloth to Naruto's back and started to scrub away the mess of the battle from the backs of his shoulders down to the base of his spine. The lady was determined to not miss a single speck. Every time that Naruto sighed under her touch, she saw it as a reason to smile. His reaction also convinced her to slow her pace to a methodical approach that her hands followed through with. Who knew how many minutes it took, but she did manage to purge Naruto's tan complexion of any imperfections left on it by the environment. When it was time to move on, she did something unexpected. Instead of stepping around Naruto, she leaned forward so that her chest was pushing against Naruto's damp back. Feminine assets and all her added weight only made Naruto slouch forward some, but other than that he was perfectly fine. Ashera settled her face next to Naruto's whiskered cheek so she could observe his front half. Due to her unplanned interaction, his eyes flew open with some alarm in them. He looked to the side at a totally unbothered expression on Ashera's pretty face. Sensing his question coming, Ashera stopped him before he could even ask. "Take a breath and relax. I need to clean off your front, that's all." Obviously Ashera didn't need to have her chest pressed on him in such a way to do what she said, but that's what happened. Blue eyes stared into purple for a long minute before Naruto ultimately nodded and did as instructed. With approval given to her, she pushed the cloth down Naruto's collarbone and started to wipe away on Naruto's chest. Stray drops from the cloth running down his front. Even with the cloth in her waist, she felt the dense muscle underneath the assassin's skin and how it reacted to her touch. There was a gentle hum as her hand rubbed over to his other pectoral muscle. Musical as the sound was, it also helped Naruto ease up as he sat beneath her body. Her free hand laced around the side of his body and her fingers danced nimbly over the grooves that helped define his abdomen. So decidedly there were chunks of wet sand stuck there that she needed to push out to get Naruto fully washed, which also gave her fingers reason to dig into his abdominals. Now the beautiful Dornish woman would be lying if she said that she wasn't enjoying her hands-on time with Naruto's impressive physique. It was one thing to look at it, but to feel it undiluted underneath her hands and fingers was another thing entirely. Satisfying or not, she wouldn't let his phenomenal figure stop her from doing what she said she'd do, that being cleaning him up. A sense of responsibility or no, the pair were looking quite intimate in the manner that they were positioned against each other. The quietness and gentle breathing of the two only enhanced the image the pair were portraying in time. Ashera's free hand was traded out for the cloth, and her hand moving south was a reminder of their very interesting roles. His mind kicked back up and he did tense some when her hand began to scrub at his abs. Her hand never went past that line created by his pants, but the tension in his body did make it so that she spent more time on his abs since they were so nicely presented for her. When she was finished with him from the shoulders down, Ashera took the stool with her. When she walked around him up in the space in front of him, she draped the sullied cloth over the rim of the bucket. Okay Naruto, don't move your head too much, I'm going to take a look at these cuts. Emotion took the better part of Naruto's mind. He raised his brow in response, uncaring of how the action jostled the bloodied flesh under his hairline. Do you know what you're doing? He couldn't help but raise his doubts about her statement. Ashera chose to ignore his comment for a moment. She grasped Naruto's jaw and made him look down so that she could examine the higher of the two cuts. Yes, I do. I learned how to handle small injuries thanks to my mother. The picturesque raven-haired beauty enlightened her charge as one of her hands pushed his unruly hair out of the way so that her other hand could bring a new cloth up to the laceration. The angle that Ashera forced him into made Naruto look right into her chest. He couldn't help but look for a fleeting moment before he averted his eyes down further to his thighs. What's the damage look like? As she carefully dabbed the balled up cloth against his cut and absorbed some of the blood. Ashera's head was tipped ever so slightly to the side. When she pulled the cloth back, she was pleased to see that there wasn't a lot of blood coming back up. It looks like you avoided stitches. This is strange. I thought for sure that you'd need at least 2 stitches. With how you were bleeding, hey, I could have told you that much, Naruto said to himself, amused by her reaction to his healing injuries. Naruto was distracted at that moment, and as such he let out a small oof when his head was forced back up. Now he was staring right into Ashera's piercing purple hues. The two of them were extremely close thanks to how she was leaning in towards his face. Her proximity led to Naruto holding his breath for a moment, as Ashera carefully slid her thumb along his cut lip. His lips were slightly chapped from the desert air, but her focus was the abrasion on his lower lip. Does it hurt? She asked while gently moving her thumb against the injured bit of flesh. Properly distracted with her pleasing scent, the softness of her smooth skin, and by the liveliness in the eyes that were trained on his lips, Naruto was rocked into silence. No, it doesn't. When he did reply after the moment of silence, it was in a slow, deliberate fashion. She felt and watched his lips move against her finger and nodded accordingly. Slowly she panned her eyes along Naruto's face, taking in things she hadn't in their previous encounters, from the lips and over his whisker-like marks. Ashera was pulled into those deep oceanic blue eyes. He's handsome. Both forgot their words, and quiet breathing was traded back and forth. It was barely above a murmur in the wind, but it may as well have sounded like thunder in their ears. With how close they were, neither was willing to blink as the warmth of the other began to intermingle against their bodies. That was when eyes began to lose their focus in favor of something else. The more time stretched on, the more undeniable the presence of some kind of attraction was. It was too early to say how deep that attraction between the two adults went, but at the very least it was physical. And finally the status quo was broken when someone leaned in